The wind that whipped through the steel skeleton of the high-rise construction site was cold enough to freeze the breath in a man's lungs, but it was nothing compared to the chill Lucas felt every time he checked his bank account balance. At 32, Lucas Miller carried the weight of the world in the calluses of his hands and the stoop of his shoulders, a single father trying to build a life on a foundation that felt like it was constantly crumbling beneath his feet. He stood on the 24th floor of the unfinished luxury apartment complex in downtown Chicago, looking out over a city that seemed to be made of gold and glass, a city that had no place for men like him. His stomach gave a violent, painful growl, a reminder that he had skipped breakfast again to ensure his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had enough milk for her cereal. He tightened his tool belt, the leather worn and cracked, and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger, telling himself that as long as he could keep swinging his hammer, as long as he could keep the electricity on and the landlord at bay, the hunger was a price he was willing to pay. But today, the exhaustion was heavy, a physical weight that pressed behind his eyes, fueled by the terrifying realization that payday was still 4 days away and he had exactly $7 to his name. Before we continue this story of struggle and unexpected redemption, I have a small favor to ask. If you believe that kindness is a currency that never loses its value, and if you believe that good things come to those who keep their hearts open even in the darkest times, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support helps us share more stories that touch the soul. The lunch whistle blew, a shrill sound that echoed off the concrete pillars, signaling the only 30 minutes of respite Lucas would get all day, while the other men on the crew headed toward the food trucks that lined the street below, the smell of sizzling grease and roasted meat wafting up to tempt him. Lucas grabbed his battered tin lunchbox and headed for a quiet park bench a few blocks away. He couldn't afford the food trucks, and he didn't want the other guys to see the meager meal he had packed for himself. Walking through the crowded city streets, Lucas felt invisible, a ghost in dirty work boots and a high-visibility vest navigating a sea of tailored suits and designer coats. He found his usual spot, a weathered wooden bench under an oak tree that was just beginning to lose its leaves to autumn. He sat down with a heavy sigh, the aches in his back throbbing in rhythm with his heartbeat, and opened the lunchbox. Inside sat a single sandwich, 2 slices of the cheapest white bread he could find, slathered with a thin layer of peanut butter and a slightly bruised apple. It wasn't much, barely enough to fuel a man doing heavy labor, but it was all he had. As Lucas unwrapped the plastic cling wrap, carefully trying to preserve it to use again tomorrow, he noticed he wasn't alone. Sitting on the far end of the bench was a figure that seemed to have been carved out of the city's shadows. The man looked to be in his late 60s, his face a map of deep wrinkles and gray stubble, his clothes a mismatched collection of woolen layers that had seen better decades, let alone better days. He wore a beanie pulled low over his ears, and his hands, shaking slightly, were wrapped around a paper cup that looked empty. People walked by him with aggressive indifference, their eyes fixed on their phones or the horizon, actively pretending he didn't exist. The man didn't ask for money, he didn't hold a sign. He just stared at the pigeon pecking at the pavement near his worn-out sneakers with a look of profound, silent loneliness that struck a chord deep within Lucas's chest. Lucas looked at his sandwich, then at the old man, and then back at the sandwich. His stomach roared in protest, a desperate plea for calories, but his heart, the heart that Lily had softened with her unconditional love, spoke louder. "Rough day?" Lucas asked, his voice gravelly from the dust of the construction site. The old man jumped slightly, as if he wasn't used to being addressed, and turned his head. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, piercing and intelligent beneath the weary brow. He looked at Lucas, really looked at him, assessing the construction dust on his face and the exhaustion in his eyes. "You could say that," the man replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "The cold gets into the bones faster than it used to." Lucas nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. He hesitated for only a second before breaking the sandwich in half. It was already small, and half would leave him starving. But he couldn't eat in front of a man who looked like he hadn't seen a warm meal in days. "I don't have much," Lucas said, extending the half sandwich wrapped in the plastic. "But it's peanut butter. Sticks to your ribs." The old man looked at the offering, his eyes widening slightly. He looked from the bread to Lucas's face, searching for a trace of mockery or pity, but found only genuine solidarity. "I can't take your lunch, son," the man said softly. "You look like you've been working hard. You need the strength." Lucas smiled, a tired but warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm young," Lucas lied, ignoring the ache in his knees. "I'll be fine. Besides, my daughter always tells me sharing makes the food taste better. Her name is Lily. She's smarter than me already." The mention of his daughter made Lucas's chest swell with pride and anxiety simultaneously. The old man hesitated, then reached out with a trembling hand and took the half sandwich. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Arthur." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the corporate world bustling around them, oblivious to the communion happening on the park bench. Lucas finished his half quickly, the hunger barely dented, and handed Arthur the bruised apple as well. "For dessert," Lucas joked. Arthur accepted it with a nod. "Tell me about Lily," Arthur said, taking a small bite of the bread, and Lucas did. He found himself opening up to this stranger in a way he hadn't with anyone else. He talked about how Lily's mother had passed away 3 years ago, leaving a hole in their lives that no amount of overtime could fill. He spoke about the terror of rising rent prices, the dampness in their basement apartment that made Lily cough at night, and the dream he had of one day starting his own small contracting business, fixing up old houses instead of just building glass towers for the wealthy. He didn't complain, he just stated the facts of his life, the brutal, unvarnished truth of survival. Arthur listened with an intensity that was disarming, asking questions about Lucas's skills, his background, and his views on architectural integrity. "You seem to know a lot about buildings for a man." "In your position," Lucas noted gently, trying not to offend. Arthur chuckled, a dry sound. "I've watched a lot of buildings go up in this city. I've seen the skyline change. You know, son, most people build for money, very few build for people. You seem like a man who understands the difference." Lucas checked his cheap wristwatch and sighed. "I wish I could build something that lasted," Lucas admitted, standing up and brushing the crumbs from his lap. "But right now, I'm just trying to build a week where I don't have to choose between electricity and groceries." He looked at Arthur one last time. "Take care of yourself, Arthur. If I see you here tomorrow, I'll bring an extra sandwich." Arthur looked up, his blue eyes shimmering. "You're a good man, Lucas Miller. The world needs more of you." Lucas walked back to the site, his stomach empty but his spirit strangely lighter. However, the lightness was short-lived. 2 days later, disaster struck. The foreman called Lucas into the temporary trailer office at the base of the construction site. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and bad news. "I'm sorry, Miller," the foreman said, not looking up from his clipboard. "The developers are cutting costs. They're bringing in a cheaper subcontracting crew for the finishing work. We have to let you go, effective immediately." The words hit Lucas like a sledgehammer to the chest. He stood there, stunned, his hard hat in his hands. "But I haven't missed a day," Lucas stammered, panic rising in his throat like bile. "I do the work of 2 men. My daughter. I need this paycheck." The foreman shrugged, a gesture of corporate helplessness. "It's out of my hands, Lucas. Here's your final check for the week. Good luck." The walk home that afternoon was the longest of Lucas's life. The sky had turned a slate gray, and a freezing drizzle began to fall, soaking through his jacket. He clutched the check in his pocket. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for rent, for food, for the winter coat Lily needed. He felt like a failure, a man who had tried to play by the rules and had still lost the game. When he entered their small, dimly lit apartment, Lily ran to him, her face lighting up. "Daddy, you're home early!" She hugged his legs, burying her face in his damp jeans. Lucas sank to his knees and held her tight, fighting back tears. He couldn't tell her yet. He made her dinner, macaroni and cheese, and sat in the dark kitchen while she slept, staring at the wall, wondering if he should sell his truck, his tools, anything to stay afloat. The next morning, Lucas was up before dawn, circling ads in the newspaper, preparing to beg for day labor. He was about to leave when there was a sharp knock on the door. Lucas frowned. Nobody visited them. He opened the door to find a man in an immaculate black suit standing in the hallway. The man looked out of place in the peeling corridor of the tenement building. "Mr. Lucas Miller?" the stranger asked. "Yes," Lucas replied, defensive, assuming it was a debt collector. "My name is James. I'm the personal assistant to the CEO of Pendelton Enterprises. Mr. Pendleton has requested your presence at his office immediately regarding a consultation. Lucas blinked, confused. Pendleton Enterprises owned half the city. They were the developers of the very building he had just been fired from. There must be a mistake, Lucas said. I was fired yesterday. I'm just a carpenter. James smiled enigmatically. Mr. Pendleton doesn't make mistakes. The car is waiting. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Lucas agreed. He rode in the back of a black town car that smelled of leather and money, watching the city blur by. They arrived at the Pendleton Tower, a glass monolith that pierced the clouds. Lucas felt painfully underdressed in his flannel shirt and work boots as he was ushered through a lobby that cost more than he would earn in 10 lifetimes. They took a private elevator to the top floor, the penthouse suite. The doors opened to reveal an office that was vast and silent, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, with his back to the door, was a man looking out at the city. "Mr. Miller," the man said, spinning his chair around. Lucas froze. The suit was Italian silk, the grooming was impeccable, and the aura of power was undeniable, but the face, the deep wrinkles, the gray stubble, and those piercing blue eyes was unmistakable. It was Arthur, the beggar from the park. Lucas's jaw dropped. "Arthur?" he whispered, disbelief coloring his voice. The billionaire smiled, the same genuine smile he had worn on the bench. "Hello, Lucas. Please, sit down." Arthur gestured to a leather chair. Lucas sat, his mind reeling. I don't understand. You were on the bench. You were hungry." Arthur stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against it casually. "I was hungry." "Yes, but not for food. I was hungry for truth." Arthur sighed, looking at his hands. "I built this empire from nothing, Lucas. I have thousands of employees, advisors, and friends. But as I got older, I realized I didn't know who I could trust. Everyone wants something from Arthur Pendelton. They see the wallet, not the man. So once a year I dress down. I go out into the city I helped build to see if the heart of it is still beating. I sit on that bench for hours. Hundreds of people pass me. My own executives walk right by me without a glance. But you stopped." Arthur walked over and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "You had every reason to walk past. You were hungry, tired, and struggling. I saw the look in your eyes, and yet you broke your bread. You shared your sustenance with a stranger who could offer you nothing in return. You told me about your daughter, your dreams, your values. You spoke about building for people, not just profit." Arthur moved back to his desk and picked up a thick folder. "I heard you were let go from the Plaza project, a clerical error in judgment by middle management that has since been corrected." He slid the folder across the polished wood toward Lucas. "This is not a job offer, Lucas. This is a partnership." Lucas opened the folder. It was a contract, but not for a carpenter. It was a contract for a project manager position for the new community housing initiative Pendleton Enterprises was launching, a project dedicated to renovating affordable housing for low-income families. The salary listed was more than Lucas had hoped to make in 5 years. "I need someone who knows the struggle," Arthur said, his voice serious. "Someone who knows that a wall isn't just drywall and studs, but safety for a child. Someone who builds with heart. I want you to run this division. And," Arthur added, his eyes twinkling, "there is a clause in there for a full college trust fund for Miss Lily." Tears finally spilled over Lucas's cheeks. He looked from the paper to the billionaire who had shared his peanut butter sandwich. "Arthur, I don't know what to say." "Why me?" Arthur smiled. "Because you gave me the only honest lunch I've had in 20 years. And because you proved that even when you have nothing, you have everything that matters." Lucas signed the contract, his hand shaking not from hunger this time, but from relief. The fear that had gripped his heart for years evaporated, replaced by a future he could finally see clearly. He wasn't just saving himself, he was going to build homes for people just like him. We are almost at the end of this journey, and I have one question for you. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the cold wind and the warmth of redemption, please leave a comment below. It can be a simple heart emoji, or share a time when a stranger helped you. Your interaction helps this message reach millions. Type "kindness matters" in the comments right now if you believe that a single act of generosity can change the world. Lucas left the tower that day, not as an invisible laborer, but as a man who had been seen. He picked up Lily from school, and for the first time in her life, he took her to a real restaurant. As they sat there, laughing and eating, Lucas realized that the sandwich he had given away was the best investment he had ever made. He had cast his bread upon the waters, and it had returned to him 1,000-fold. It wasn't the money that saved him. It was his humanity. In a city of glass and steel, the strongest foundation turned out to be the kindness of a stranger and the love of a father who was willing to share his last crumb.